Why do conservatives and progressives differ so much on matters like defunding the police? Let's find out together. But first, let's recap what we already know about conservatives.
When you hear the word conservative, what comes to mind? Racist, bigot? Okay, yeah. How rich? How original? I think that's what the media would have you believe. If you're out there and you're not familiar with what a conservative is, listen up. When you're talking about a conservative is a person who belongs to a political faction that if you were to actually uproot them to put them into any political space or political organism, they would act as a part of a class that serves the function of putting the brakes on a train that has no brakes. That's it. Throughout time, space, reality, conservatives are the brakes to a train that has no brakes. That is it.
Oh my God! Oh, geez.
From a longitudinal perspective, yes, always think French Revolution, if nothing else. Ask who were the people that pushed back against the pressures of industrialization brought about by liberalism, socialism, nationalism? Who within society takes a resistant posture when they see progressive ideas spearhead society towards a cliff? When ideologies nest on a progressive dial and the dial is headed towards a utopia, there will always be an ideology that will shout, hey, your utopia is paving the road to hell. This is the part where we segue into understanding a cultural conservative's reaction to social injustice, racism, homicide. If you don't outsource your opinions to the state who tells you that conservatives are just racist, you'll actually pick up a pattern that cultural conservatives display in order to help them as they conserve life, liberty, and happiness. There's a pattern that includes the role of government, order, authority, and justice, and risk versus proof. That can be an equation if you think about it. The most important variable of that equation being the role of government. This is the part where it gets really juicy, guys. There's a reason why I mentioned role of government, order, authority, and discipline, risk versus proof, all in that particular order. This is a formula we can actually use to solve the question of how cultural conservatism conserves life, liberty, and happiness. This political faction leads with the role of government first, to apply the trinity of order, authority, and discipline second, and then they operate off of what they won't risk versus what can be proven last. This is my own theory. So let's put cultural conservatives who have a negative freedom orientation, meaning they keep the state in a negative. Let's dump them in a hypothetical where they are the witnesses of police brutality. How will they react under that circumstance in a way that conserves life, liberty, and happiness? All we have to do is apply that crazy formula I pulled out of the air. First things first, let's tackle this role of government business. After I explain the cultural conservatives' perspective on role of government to you, everything falls into place. There is an epigenetic subconscious response within the conservative camp where they construe all problems, consciously or not, through a principle. The principle is that the government's role is to regulate, legislate, and manage incompatible interest groups. And most important of all, the government's role is to reflect the people it governs over. As a principle, government cannot, will not dispense morality. It literally can't. It won't. It's pretty much, it's not its job or its function to do that. That was never government's function. So if we start there and the government's most important role is to reflect its citizenry, that promises that the government will manage, legislate, and regulate the flawed solutions citizens want to become policy. Government will mirror the flaws of its citizens because it has no more morality than the people in it. This is a principle. So what comes next? That trinity. You have the trinity of order, authority, and discipline added to the mix. Cultural conservatives will try to foster those three things into their communities because they know if they respond emotionally to the scenario of police brutality, if their solution to corrupt police is worse than corrupt police, that is a risk not worth taking. Government in this case is the eye of Sauron. All the variables of role of government, order, authority, and discipline, risk versus proof are right here. I am feeding them to you If we dig more into the scenario, in the case of police brutality and an inherently racist prison system, how will the cultural conservative conserve life, liberty, and happiness? I'll tell you, they will either confirm or deny corruption exists. It doesn't matter. The cultural conservative knows that they have a better chance at defeating the corruption they confirm or deny exists if the solution to police brutality isn't an emotional solution. An emotional response to police brutality would mean endorsing a solution like defunding the police. What's going to happen next when you do that? What will happen next is that the government, by nature of what its function is, will manage, regulate, or legislate the flawed solution of defunding the police, resulting in legislating, regulating, and managing laws where predators have more rights than law-abiding citizens. The principle of government tells cultural conservatives to subvert that entire business by not taking risk, because defunding the police begets worse outcomes than police brutality and police corruption. The cultural conservative will not prove defunding the police is a bad idea. They won't even risk to go into debate, but they will watch citizens who endorse defunding the police get fed to their own logic. The government as principle mirrors the citizenry. If you have a corrupt or flawed solution to corruption, you get delivered to your own debased mind. This is what we've witnessed from cultural conservatives who have demonstrated this pattern of observing government's role, applying a trinity of order, authority, and discipline within their own communities. They do this all to avoid the risk of growing government. They avoid the risk, and they're not interested in proving why the risk exists. Cultural conservatives are more likely to take justice into their own hands. They place down deterrence for predators the old-fashioned way. They would not get state involved. What has to be underscored here is something that most people find so unsavory. It's that conservatives today can literally have the wrong or right take on corruption, police brutality, but they have the right caution when it comes to government. Therefore, they attract least recessive results. That is the irony of life. Let's discover the different but similar pattern that positive freedom orientations use to aspire to life, liberty, and happiness. If you notice, cultural conservatives seek to conserve life, liberty, and happiness. Progressives and liberals aspire to life, liberty, and happiness. Observe these political factions together and you'll see a stark difference. Let's talk about it. Progressives and modern liberals aspire to life, liberty, and happiness by not questioning risk. They believe the state can prove itself to be the arbiter of order, authority, and discipline, and they do not recognize role of government as government was intended whatsoever. To positive freedom orientations, government is capable of morality. Government can prove itself to be moral. And so the proof of that exists in our reality. The pattern of their behavior is an avoidance of risk assessment for the greater good of achieving order, authority, and discipline from the top down. The government proves itself to be moral. So if we apply this to the scenario of police brutality in a corrupt prison system, the positive freedom orientations like modern liberals, progressives, they will grow the state progressively to defund the police. The solution is expected to offset and restore order, authority, and discipline from the top down. The government proves itself to be the arbiter of morality this way, because if it can prove that it can lower disparities within the prison system, that's the greatest good for community. So there is a sacrificial element within the class of people that endorse positive freedom. They do seek to cure disparities, and they do it at the expense of themselves and their community. On paper, disparities do vanish, but it's because the predators are no longer in prison. They are left to terrorize communities or the law-abiding citizen class. How did this happen? It was not observed that government as a principle manages, legislates, regulates you as a social organism. If you're a social organism that decides that equal and equitable outcomes are the highest aim, and you take the virtues of compassion, tolerance, you take all of those things to direct it towards the wrong subject or object, like predators, this is what you get. The government will then manage and regulate laws protecting predators. And should you regret the decision of defunding the police, government is not capable of pulling an Uno reverse card. Since government manages the flawed solution of defunding the police, government is more than likely to help communities assimilate to living amongst robbers and thieves. Government sponsors messages about how to give up your personal possessions, how to keep your car unlocked, how to never defend your life in your own home. The predator in this case must have his or her dignity protected. Yours comes last. Millions of citizens who want to live this way will consent to better managing their lives around predators as their ideology demands. You see it in reality, especially within progressive sanctioned cities. Believe your eyes and your ears. You're not crazy. The positive freedom orientations attract governments that reflect their flawed solution set. So what must be underscored here is that liberals and progressives can have the correct assessment, the trendy assessment on social injustice, racism, and colorism, and all that other stuff. They can have it right. However, they have the wrong caution. And so they believe government is capable of morality. And to cover up the recessive results, they'll just make sure the disparities and all the nastiness doesn't exist on statistic logs. They progress themselves into a future they have absolutely no recourse for. They are educated and indoctrinated into growing the state in the positive. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your positive freedom orientation. Does it make sense yet? If you are a cultural conservative, you are a negative freedom orientation, and you are not compatible with positive freedom orientations. You're not. Government feeds you to your own logic. If your logic is poor, then the government will manage, regulate, and legislate your poor logic. You get fed to your own debased mind. And that doesn't make you enemies. That really just means that you are like freshwater and saltwater fish, and you don't belong in the same aquarium. To cultural conservatives, you can only meet corruption with authority, order, discipline from your community, or else you end up with a government that makes your problems worse.
You know about my politics,
If you want to continue the conversation on cultural conservatism, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. In the next video, we're going to look at some real-life examples of what we've covered here. How does the government reflect your debased mind? Let's talk about it in the next video. Peace out, you guys.